My therapy session turned into me consoling her, and I didn't pay for that. So, I've been in therapy for a few months, nothing dramatic, just anxiety, self-worth stuff, overthinking, classic 2020s mental clutter, but lately something's shifted and the lines feel all blurred. My therapist, a calm mid-40s woman, started oversharing in ways that left me unmoored. One session she told me about her terrible week, the next she asked me if I thought she was a good therapist. Our roles flipped. I felt like I was holding space for her dramas instead of the other way around. I mean, isn't she supposed to be the one with the answers? Then, out of nowhere, she told me, honestly, you give me hope. Most clients spiral, you're different. I froze. I came expecting guidance, not to babysit her emotions. The session ended with her whispering, "Thanks, I really needed that today instead of our usual great progress." I left with a pounding question in my chest: who am I in this session? A client? A confidant? A lifeline for her fragile balance? I kept digging online. Apparently therapists can self-disclose to build trust, but only judiciously and only when it helps the client, not when it shifts focus away from my growth. Boundaries are supposed to hold the space, the professional structure that gives therapy its power. Yet here I am, rereading the logs of our sessions, wondering when this pact broke. The next session felt like a minefield. She kicked off with, "You were really the only client I feel this way about, and, do you ever wish we switched roles?" Her tone was fragile, as if she expected applause for her vulnerability. I could almost feel the steam of her own anxiety spilling onto me, countertransference in action, that blurred emotional reflex where professional feelings bleed into the therapeutic space. I stalled, my breath caught, words lodged in my throat. It wasn't my job to reassure her, yet I answered. I told her that her honesty was welcome, but maybe it didn't belong here. She nodded with that half-knowing smile, but I could tell she was hungry for validation, hungry for me to wrap her in a halo of reassurance. My skin itched inside that session, hearing her say I needed that, like I'd suddenly become her emotional support system, like I was running a therapy practice for her pain. The boundaries I'd learned to lean on dissolved with her confessions. I remember thinking, this is wrong. My anxiety was simmering, but I couldn't express it without feeling like I was punching a therapist in the face. So I stayed calm, I structured my thoughts, I reminded myself, therapy is for me, not for her feeling good moments. The silence that ended that session was charged, as if the air said it all. I walked out feeling bruised, confused, weighty in a way that made therapy feel like a tether, not a lifeline. By the time of my next session, I'd read up on countertransference and boundary crossings, therapists having emotional reactions or oversharing when their own issues get triggered. Apparently, it's common, even normal, but still supposed to be managed carefully. I walked into her office clutching that in mind. I framed it in my head as data, not panic. But the moment she greeted me, smiling too warmly, leaning in, I felt the roles shift again. She started with, "I've been thinking of you all week. Your resilience gives me courage." She told me what she'd confided to friends over the weekend, listed details about her sleep deprivation, her fights with her partner, as if I wasn't supposed to register the emotional gravity of it. My chest went tight. I thought, I paid for this space, and yet it feels like I'm stepping onto her therapy couch. I pushed back gently, "I'm concerned this might be shifting focus from my own progress." My voice was softer than panic, more like a reminder. She paused, then admitted she'd been overwhelmed lately and maybe I had helped her feel seen. My heart fluttered. This was exactly the renegotiation of roles I didn't sign up for. She asked again, "Do you think I'm doing this right?" And I realized, this ribbing minefield isn't just awkward, it's unprofessional. I remembered reading it, when boundaries erode, therapy becomes about them, not you. I clamped my mouth shut again until the silence felt like permission to speak. So I did. I told her I valued her support, but I needed sessions to be consistent, centered on my needs, and that if she was struggling, maybe she needed supervision or to take a break. She nodded, made a note, and we ended with a quiet, "Thank you." That afternoon, I felt something shift inside me, an armored smile of self-respect. Therapy didn't have to be a hostage exchange. I did some more reading and learned that good therapists manage their countertransference with supervision, self-reflection, and strict professional limits. If they don't, clients are not obligated to stay, they can safely raise concerns or even change therapists. Over the next few weeks, sessions began to feel more centered again. She still showed empathy, but stopped oversharing. We reset boundaries. She'd mention when she was off or struggling, but only in clear context, and asked me if it was okay first. Those small changes reshaped our work. I found trust again, and space to accept help without becoming helper. And me? I learned that therapy isn't just about unraveling yourself, it's about safeguarding yourself too. It isn't meant to flip roles, it's meant to hold them steady, with empathy on one side and curiosity on the other. If the therapist leans too far towards self-disclosure, it's fair game to call it out. Your emotional space isn't charity, it's the ground you paid to explore. So here I am, still in therapy, still untangling the overthinking and self-worth knots, but now with an added lesson inked in bold. Sometimes boundaries are the bravest word you can say to someone whose job it is to keep you safe. They may stumble. They should reflect. And you should never forget which side of the couch you're on. The following week, I walked into her office like someone entering enemy territory, cautious, tiptoeing around words I hadn't yet figured out. After our last emotionally fraught session, I'd researched, not to snoop or diagnose, but to arm myself. I learned about countertransference, where therapists unconsciously project their own feelings onto clients, and how oversharing can skew the therapeutic focus. I reminded myself, therapy isn't a mutual life swap, it's a space for me to breathe, to unravel. She began by once more acknowledging how much I mattered, how I was different, her tone soft but unmistakable. She sounded vulnerable. My pulse quickened, the imbalance settling over me like damp clothes. I could feel her emotional entanglement, that same dynamic where she asked, "Do you think I'm a good therapist?" It wasn't just inappropriate, it was a boundary collapse. I let a quiet moment stretch. When she realized I wasn't immediately reassuring her, relief flickered, then fatigue. I tipped forward. "I want to be open with you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'm here to work on me. When the session veers into your needs, I can't progress." The office got quieter. She's professional, she heard me. For a beat, clinical gravity returned. She nodded, made a brief note. Afterwards, I researched boundary work. Therapists must define the professional frame from the start, revisiting it as needed, time limits, contact rules, confidentiality, but mostly vocalizing, "This isn't about me." I learned how self-disclosure can be therapeutic when used judiciously, but if it becomes frequent or personal, it shifts the power, pushing support onto the client instead. I realized I'd been loaning emotional space, and that wasn't my job. The next few sessions felt different, quieter, safer. She recentered me, asking, "How do you feel about that?" instead of divulging her week. Occasionally she'd say, "I've had a hard day, but I'm okay," pausing to check in, "Is that okay with you?" It was a sign she'd re-engaged her supervision and perhaps her own therapy, critical for managing countertransference. I could finally talk without the weight of repairing her week or editing her emotional bleed. Trust returned slowly. Sessions deepened, my anxiety, my self-worth, overthinking pains came back into focus. She listened, guided without oversharing, and sometimes paused to reflect her empathy rather than her issues. Every time I said, "That helped," the rigid frame felt strengthened anew. My sense of progress, something I hadn't felt in weeks, returned. Then came a turning point. One afternoon she asked, "Do you feel like we're back on track?" Her tone was professional, almost clinical. I said yes. I described how powerful it felt to own the narrative again, unblended with her life. She smiled, genuine and relieved. I recognized the shape of supervision at work. She was realigning with boundaries that contained therapy, not dilute it. A few sessions later, she let me ask the last question, "Is your need for me draining your ability to serve me?" She paused. This was the kind of transparency therapy should allow, not the emotional reversal of previous sessions. She admitted she'd noticed her energy dipping, had consulted with peers, recalibrated. I nodded. Our roles, our purpose, tempered, respectful, clear. Outside, I processed as fiercely as I'd ever processed. I reread session notes, then threw them in the bin. Ate sushi, walked in sunlight, finally recording progress that wasn't entangled with someone else's needs. I felt awake, calmer, focused, reclaiming the space I'd bought, the center of a relationship I'd paid to define. I stayed. But my criteria had changed, therapy only if the focus remained mine, and if she maintained boundaries that honored both our roles. Boundaries aren't walls, they're the structural ribs of care. Power doesn't dissolve when therapy works, it becomes safer, richer. Today, I sit at my desk knowing this. Mental health isn't just about healing, it's about repair. Not just in me, but in the system. I call this chapter When Care Needs Recalibrating. And yeah, I'm proud. Because the real work wasn't in unraveling my mind, but in protecting my space to grow. When the person who's paid to hold you needs holding, that's the boundary moment worth honoring. And the importance of professional boundaries felt like a shield in my pocket. She greeted me with her warm, practiced calm, but today I noticed her voice bore a subtle tremor, as if she'd been rehearsing her lines in front of a mirror. She opened with, "I've been thinking about us," and I could tell she meant herself. My pulse quickened, but I stayed steady. I remembered that comfortable role I'd slipped into, therapist by proxy, caretaker of her moods, and I told myself, not today. I spoke up, "I value our work, but I want it to stay centered on my growth." When personal disclosures happen too often, it shifts something, our contract, the container of therapy. Her eyebrows dipped briefly, and for a moment it felt like a stone dropped into still water. Then she exhaled, leaning back. "You were right," she said softly. "I've been going through something, and I took it here too much. I appreciate you saying that." This was exactly how supervision should go, the therapist, like any professional, acknowledging a personal slip and realigning out loud. That moment, simple, honest, unflinching, reclaimed the frame for me. Afterward, I did more reading. Very well Mind noted that unchecked countertransference can damage therapy, but also that when therapists handle it well, with supervision, reflection, it can strengthen the relationship. I learned that ethical self-disclosure is about intention. It should build the alliance to support the client's goals, not crowd the session with the therapist's needs. I cross-checked with guidelines. Self-disclosure must be brief, purposeful, and client-focused. Context-sensitive, never intake-shifting or needy. The following sessions felt different, grounded, purposeful. She still might share a brief check-in. "I slept poorly last night, but I'm here," always pausing, asking first, "Is this okay to share?" Then, "How do you feel hearing that?" It was a professional pivot, not intimate confessions, but honest signals. And each time she asked permission, I felt us rediscovering our roles. I was the client with a story, she was the clinician with tools and perspective. Week by week, the sessions returned to their original rhythm. I felt a growing sense of safety. My anxiety, my self-worth issues, my inner frictions, all found space to breathe and be understood. I noticed my chest expanding in relief. This space belonged to me again. Midway through the month, she asked gently, "How do you feel our dynamic is now?" A therapeutic check-in I hadn't expected. I said I felt respected, supported, and held within clear boundaries. Her face softened. I realized she'd taken my feedback seriously. She'd consulted peers, adjusted her approach, and recalibrated. When therapy works, it isn't about perfection, it's about responsiveness. The teacher becomes the guardian of balance, the student becomes the author of their own therapy. We ended each session with reflections on growth, not gratitude for emotional labor. I felt seen, I felt centered, above all, I felt empowered. Outside the office, I processed it all in small rituals, painting a swirl on my journal, rewriting a passage about clarity, reconnecting with friends, building routines that anchored my sense of self-worth. I noticed I no longer hesitated to speak up, whether asking a question at a meeting, confronting old patterns, or simply trusting an intuition. Therapy wasn't an echo chamber anymore, it was a launch pad. Today, I sit at my desk, stamp beside me, reflecting on this boundary shift, on speaking up for what I needed, on how I learned that honoring your space isn't selfish, it's essential. My anxiety remains, but it wears a different face, the face of self-respect. Because real healing didn't happen in emotional labor or therapist ego soothing, it happened when I reclaimed the space I paid for, when professional care was professional again, and when the line between helper and healed stood firm. That line isn't a barrier, it's the ground on which growth stands. When I walked into the next session, I carried with me more than just anticipation. I carried the weight of professional guidelines and my own boundaries. Over the past weeks, I had read about countertransference and how important it is in therapy to maintain a clear focus. Therapists are human, sometimes their own issues seep into sessions. But there are standards, they must reflect, seek supervision, and never let their personal experiences overshadow the client's needs. My heart thumped as she greeted me, her usual warmth was replaced by a measured calm, and I sensed that she had done the work too. She began with, "I've thought about what we discussed, about where the focus belongs." I nodded, encouraged by her opening. She went on, "I value you, but this is your space. I've returned to supervision, reread our notes, and I want us to stay centered on your goals." Her words confirmed that she recognized the boundary shift, and more importantly, acted on it. We navigated the session differently that day. Instead of her emotional confessions, she asked, "What's top of mind for you?" And I spoke about my anxiety around overthinking, about how my self-esteem wavered when I got negative feedback at work. She listened, reflecting back with empathy and neutrality, not her mood, not her week, but me. It felt safe. By week 3, the shift had taken root. She would occasionally mention personal context, but always briefly. I had a rough night, but I'm here for you, does that work for our session? Then she turned immediately back to me. This felt like ethical self-disclosure, contextual and client-focused, not a reversal of roles. It's the kind of recalibration professionals aim for, personal enough to maintain sincerity, distant enough not to intrude. One afternoon, she asked, "How do you feel about our dynamic now?" It felt clinical, thoughtful. I replied honestly, "I feel supported, and safe. You've respected my space." She smiled, pressing a smooth card across the desk, an artwork impression of a swirl, symbolizing the boundary and the creative freedom it gave me. She said, "Our work together isn't perfect, but it's yours. And I want to continue holding that." After that session, I noticed subtle changes rippling outward. I began asserting myself at work, declining late-night emails, saying no to unhelpful feedback loops, and I remembered what I'd learned about boundaries in therapy. They aren't walls, they're the scaffolding of my sanity. I started setting clear expectations with friends and family, saying when I needed time or space, without guilt. Meanwhile, sessions focused on refining tools, breathing techniques for anxiety, reframing self-critical thoughts, mapping out a plan for professional growth. Each session started with me, stayed with me, and ended with gentle summary reflections, no personal disclosure from her beyond what served me. When the agent emailed back with constructive feedback, praise and revisions, I realized, this is the same confidence I was cultivating in therapy, the belief that feedback is not rejection, that growth comes from honesty, not emotional caretaking. 6 months in, therapy reached a natural plateau, not abrupt or disappointing, but purposeful. We scheduled a tapering phase, 2 sessions, then 1, with space to observe how I coped independently. I felt proud. I had gone into therapy seeking relief from anxiety and overthinking. I was leaving with stronger boundaries, greater self-worth, and grounded trust in the therapeutic process itself. At our final tapering session, she said, "I've grown too, as your therapist, thank you for helping me recalibrate." I nodded. I said, "Thank you for holding the space we both needed." We hugged softly, a professional touch held in mutual respect. I left that office not lighter, but more solid. Therapy had not just helped me, it had improved itself, through honest reflection and boundary recalibration. I carried the swirl stamp in my journal, reminding me that care can be deep and contained. Sitting now at my desk, I reflect, true healing isn't just about unraveling your own mind, it's about engaging in systems that actually serve your growth. Therapeutic systems, flawed as they are, can be redeemed when roles are honored, boundaries held, and when we, the clients, hold space not just for healing, but for responsible care. It isn't just self-work. It's system work too. When I stepped into what became my final formal session, I brought more than readiness, I carried clarity. We had navigated the echoes, the overshares, the role reversals, we'd restored purpose to the therapeutic space. The office, once a stage for blurred confessions, felt clean again, neutral, anchored, my domain. My therapist greeted me with a steady aloha, a gentle but purposeful work presence. It felt like the reset I'd hoped for. She began with a question that felt both routine and profound. "How has our dynamic felt for you since we recalibrated?" Her voice was clear, professional, not seeking validation, but offering connection within the professional framework. I paused, appreciating the question. "I feel like this space is truly mine again," I replied. "I feel held, and I feel heard." I noticed how my voice felt full, not hesitant. My words flowed without the familiar undertone of caution. She nodded. "I've reflected a lot. I've consulted colleagues and gone back to the guidelines on boundaries, countertransference, supervised self-disclosure. Sometimes our roles, therapist and client, bleed into each other. When that happens, the work suffers. This was not apology, it was accountability." She referenced the ethical principle that therapy is inherently asymmetric, built on structure not friendship, support not codependency. I thought of how a therapist is not a friend, but a professional anchor in emotional turbulence. She continued, "There's a balance between genuine humanity and professional boundaries. I've worked on that balance directly, going to supervision, grounding myself in reflective practices, making sure each session loops back to your needs." I felt relief. I remembered reading that unmanaged countertransference can derail treatment, but when managed properly, it can actually strengthen the alliance. She'd done that work. I could hear it in her voice. Then she slid a small card across the desk, a professional token of recognition, not a gift of sentiment, a black swirl, symbolic of our restored therapeutic contract. I smiled, feeling both seen and respected. It wasn't sentimental, it was resonant. We both understood its context. This was about structure, not sympathy. Boundaries aren't walls, they're containers for growth. We spent the rest of the session exploring the future, maintenance sessions, self-care routines, what to do if old anxiety peaks unexpectedly. She framed everything with reference to scope of practice. Therapy works when it's mutual in addressing what you need, not what I need. It was elegant symbiosis, not mutual therapy. As I walked out, I felt different, more grounded than I had in months. This space, this relationship, had reclaimed its purpose. The therapeutic alliance was normalized again, a professional connection with trust, not emotional tangledness. In that moment, I realized the quiet power of spoken boundaries, that insisting on the space I paid for didn't undermine the work, it honored it. Therapy wasn't about carrying someone else's burden, it was about holding my own. Walking out of her office for the last time, I felt something shift, strength woven from vulnerability, boundaries built from bravery. And I knew, more deeply than ever, true growth isn't found in perfect sessions, it's found in setting the frame, protecting your space, and stepping forward with clarity.